Okay, we're now recording. Welcome, welcome to Starburst, the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series for Women's History Month. Today's Sunday, March 29th, 2026. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I am Akua Leslie Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. The series was made possible in part by funding from poets and writers, using public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the New York State Legislature. May the support for the arts ever be in these United States. Thank you. This reading is being recorded, so if you have concerns, turn your camera off, except for our wonderful reader who's visible with me. Inaugurated in September 2020, this series seeks to remediate the paucity of presentations of speculative poetry by its living creators. Now in its 7th year, the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series has presented nearly 90 poet readings. Speculative poetry, ancient of days, older than the flood, the poetry of possibilities, centers the imagined as real. The first recorded human literature was speculative verse. Gilgamesh, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Iliad and Odyssey, and Beowulf are ancient examples. Speculative poetry includes alternate history, astropoetry, cryptids, cyberpunk, dystopian, fabulism, fairy tales, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, monsters, mythology, occult, paranormal, robot, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, solar funk, space opera, superhero, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms plus one called sci-fi coup. From nursery rhymes to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, from Puff the Magic Dragon to Zombie Jamboree, we've all recited and sung speculative poetry. You can find the series recordings on YouTube at SpecPo Videos, and you can find a list of past readers at speculativepoetry.com. Let me make one more note about how beautifully the speculative connects with women's history. Women in speculative poetry, I used to think of as beginning with Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, which I'd read in early school, and Emily Dickinson's witch poems. Both of them were writing before the 20th century. But I've come to know that humanity's first known author, and Hedwana, high priestess of and daughter of Sargon, is the first known author in history. She wrote hymns to the goddess Inanna and other deities, offering an early look into individual consciousness over 4,000 years ago. Let me introduce tonight's reader. Angela Acosta, Ph.D., is an assistant professor of Spanish at the University of South Carolina. She is a 2022 Dream Foundry Contest for Emerging Writers finalist and a 2022 Somos and Escrito Extra Fiction Contest honorable mention. Pardon me for a second. Her Rhysling and Best of the Net nominated poetry has appeared in Heartlines Spec, Worlds of Possibility, Apparition Lit, Radon Journal, and the Sprawl magazine. She's the author of the Elgin nominated poetry collections Summoning Space Travelers from Hiraeth Publishing in 2022 and one of my favorites, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness from Red Ogre Review in 2023. She's published articles on Spanish modernism in Persona Studies, Ámbitos Feministas, and Feminist Modernist Studies. Welcome, welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here for Women's History Month to close out this part of the reading series. For those of you who might not be too familiar with my work, I do love mostly the science fiction side of speculative poetry. So I have a selection of more science fiction oriented poems, a lot with female characters, that I'm excited to share with you all tonight. I'm joining you all from the Midlands of South Carolina on the ancestral lands of the Congaree and Catawba peoples. And I've been kind of wearing my editor hat with Eye to the Telescope lately, so I'm excited to delve back into some of my poems from the last few years. These first two poems, I don't think I've ever read live yet because they were originally written for the Strong Women, Strange Worlds 2025 holiday, one of their little holiday collection books, the Small Bites Flash Fiction Poetry and Recipes. And these are two short poems to get things started. And the first one's titled Pleasant Annoyances. Have you ever tried to open a jar in zero gravity? It's a nasty sort of joke to bend a glass cylinder to the will of hands grown gelatinous in space. Some attempt to do wizardry on the cap, conjuring a type of alchemy on the metal alloy. Others assess the properties of glass blown by the finest sprites on volcanic worlds. Small children may give up and select a less nutrient-rich snack in a more suitable pouch. Adults may do without. Yet a young adult working with her first crew delights in the pleasant annoyance of solving the one problem the kitchen crew cannot fix. I cannot imagine how difficult it would be to open a jar in space. It's always the frustration here on Earth.
Isn't it?
So I found that a fun one to write. And this next short piece is actually not from the collection. I moved things around a little bit, but this is from my own poetry collection, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness, titled Idle Dreams. Dreaming of a sky ripped by satellites, they revel in receiving binary sunbeams, teetering between the possible and the artificial. Soon they would arrive to see with human eyes what their ancestors once rendered on computers or depicted in two-dimensional schematics, their daydreams becoming the idle serenities of contented boredom for those made of stardust. And you can read the Spanish version of that poem in my collection, A Belief in Cosmic Dailiness. This next one has some female characters. I do like to write narrative poetry and think about life on other worlds and spaceships or even here on Earth. And this poem's from Heartlines Spec from 2024, and it's titled In Slumber We Rehearse Our Days. She and I were just photons, gliding across galaxies warped by gravity, the beauty of which eluded me as artificial lights tugged at my eyes. Call it shore leave, call it a break. Plan it out as a month-long return. Combine our schedules to meet in the same century, the same system, the same dingy station. The rustle of sheets jogs my memory. She knows the choreography, yet forgets to turn off the light nightly. Asleep, we relax into thoughts of togetherness. We never outline the terms and conditions of a relationship built on serendipity, on travel nearing the speed of light, and a shared love of xenobotany. We'd have another conversation about a quasi-Platonic sort of togetherness, the tacit understanding of a shared wardrobe, about when we could rendezvous again. I want to say we are not planning an EVA with spacesuits and guide cables, an intense 8-hour operation after which we collapse in a heap. We merely share a bed, cups of tea, and though yes, I vetoed it once before, my dreaming self sees the benefit of permanently adding her name to the station's roster. I think it's nice to think about kind of the logistics of finding time for someone, in a faraway place or having to cross vast distances or time to get somewhere. So I hope that in the future people are able to make things work as my characters do. Let's see. I'll next read a special poem that I wrote as a tribute to somebody who wrote a poem to me that I was very touched by. And it took me a little bit of time to think about what I wanted to say and a little bit longer to publish it. And I'm really pleased about how it turned out and how it complements this person's work. So this is for Angel Leal, who's also read on Strong Women, Strange Worlds, Speculative Poetry Sundays, and as a lovely, lovely speculative writer. And I've gotten to know her, virtually. And we each have our own styles, but I think in, talking to each other about our work, we also kind of get some ideas or encouragement from one another. And she wrote Hermanas de Andromeda, Sisters of Andromeda, in the volume 2, issue 2 of the Sprawl mag. And so for her, I wrote For I Was Planet Weary, which was then published in Ionosphere in January of this year. So this is For I Was Planet Weary. And I guess the context is that she writes a lot about just the groundedness of our lives and our ancestry and our mythologies here on Earth or maybe in other fantastic worlds where mine tends to be a little bit more far-flung or maybe focus a little more on the philosophy or technology and not always about the humanity or the emotions in some cases. So this kind of brings together our two approaches. For I was planet weary, for Angel Leal. I meditate to interstellar space, stringing a symphony from comets and the pale blue dots that draw me to habitable worlds. Me enseñaste a apreciar lo nuestro. You have taught me to appreciate what is ours. An improbable globe crying in lava to form new biomes, for I had become planet weary. I promised to bring our verses beyond Voyager 2, and you smoothed their skirts, braided their hair, and whispered stories that only abuelas and tías could tell, cuentos de la tierra sacados de los códices y las historias familiares, stories of Earth taken from codices and family histories. Over the years, I grew fatigued from planet hopping, asteroid harvesting, station living, developing a homesickness you can't kick with pozole. You showed me how to listen to my elders and instincts in equal measure, to summon the myths and legends from Latin America, and create art from both sides of the constellations as terrestrial and celestial storytellers. For now, I am planet weary, ready to rest in the bower between your stanzas. It seems like a kind of homecoming to think about after writing about all these things happening far away, what it's like to inhabit this time and place on Earth, or even just to imagine futures on Earth and the places and the locations that we are already accustomed to. I'll now read another piece that has to do with ancestry and distance. And this one is also from Ionosphere's January 2026 issue, and it's titled Meteorite Rings. These jewels have passed through many hands, the aching lands, weathering droughts, forging meteorites into bright heirlooms. Like tomatoes, these rings carry seeds, dripping like ripe fruit, a bounty for the roots of my budding generation. When my great, great, greats passed, the only thing that survived the trip across the Atlantic was their name, the misspelled promise of a community sprinkled with the stardust we are made from. Did they see Halley's Comet or the transit of Venus? When my greats inhabited homes no longer marked on maps, making recipes spiced with American-grown vegetables, their marriage vows promised in beautiful vowels made shrill in English. When we paid tribute to these greats, we cut precious emeralds, sapphires, rubies to divide among the siblings, a will not of paper, but of pressure, wrought from failed harvests, mine shafts, and old schoolhouse slate. Though I may not marry, I make this promise to gift this ring when the comet crosses again to my most beloved astronaut, who will skirt through the Oort cloud as micrometeorites send these gemstones flying from a once country to a liberated future colony. Something that I've thought quite a bit about is how, we have amassed so many things here on Earth and how that stuff, that junk, those valuable heirlooms, how that's all going to eventually go somewhere else or maybe get lost here on Earth. We're not quite at the stage yet to be sending all of that to the moon, but I imagine, within 50 years or so that'll be a definitely a consideration of where we want to bring our loved ones, bring their remains and their heirlooms. This next poem I'm going to read to you in English and then in Spanish because I wrote them pretty much simultaneously for the magazine Samovar, which is a multilingual speculative magazine that publishes the English translation and the original piece of speculative works. And I happen to have written both of them in this case. And the title itself has a slash in between the words to kind of denote the two ideas in the two languages. So the poem's titled Heritage Speaker with a slash between it, and in Spanish, Hablante Herencia. So I'll read the English first and then go to the Spanish. Heritage Speaker. I rehearsed a speech in a language that I was assigned at birth, hesitating to pronounce the happy words of a dynasty that conceived itself as human civilization. They taught me water. I say swamp, because the moss and its oaks have turned into my biome, a floating home between two seas and suns. Between turtle bubbles and gator shadows, I navigated canals of corrections, tongue twisters, and untranslatable idioms that formed a barrier wider than the rings of Saturn, more impassable than the grammar rules lacking their cultural nest. They called me foreigner in a thousand worlds. They told me I didn't contribute to the autochthonous tradition of New English letters that would always be for those who knew the rays of one sun and the smell of crystalline water of a world covered in mountains. When I return again and again to the ship where I lived, I dreamed in sonnets and corridos of all that Abya Yala gives us, of prairies and cordilleras where condors fly and storms thunder. I sometimes imagine a cosmic caesura, someone who can understand my words of our heritage, since I always fight against a culture in a museum, in a computer that collects my words of thanks, of sadness, without responding. In remote areas where all that remain are metal buildings and the hum of excavators that turn rock into illuminated tunnels, I sing for my poet siblings, from the ship that travels, from the earth and its worms, to the heart of a galaxy that also cries in Quechua, argues in Portuguese, and laughs in Chilean. Wherever you are, I will teach you how to name the birds, the satellites, and the stories of our past and future. All that is needed is to keep looking. And now I'll read the Spanish version of this piece. Ahora voy a leer la parte en español de Hablante Herencia. Ensayé un discurso en el idioma que me han asignado al nacer, titubeando al pronunciar las dichosas palabras de la dinastía que se concebía como la civilización humana. Me enseñaron agua, digo pántano, porque el musgo y sus robles se han convertido en mi bioma, un hogar flotando entre dos mares y soles, entre burbujas de tortugas y las sombras de caimanes, navegaba por los canales de correcciones, trabalenguas y dichos intraducibles que forman una barrera más ancho que los anillos de Saturno, más infranqueable que las reglas gramaticales, carentes de su nido cultural. Me llamaron forastera en mil tierras. Me decían que no contribuía a la tradición autóctona de las letras nuevas inglesas, que sería siempre para los que conocían los rayos de un sol y el olor del agua cristalina de un mundo cubierto en montañas. Cuando volvía una y otra vez a la nave donde vivía, soñaba en sonetos y corridos de todo lo que Aviala nos brinda, de praderas y cordilleras donde vuelan los cóndores y truenan las tormentas. A veces imagino una cesura cósmica, alguien que pueda entender mis palabras de nuestra herencia. Como siempre lucho contra una cultura de museo, de una computadora que colecciona mis palabras de agradecimiento, de tristeza, sin que me responde. En las zonas remotas, donde solo nos quedan edificios de metal y zumban excavadores que convierten la roca en túneles iluminados, canto para mis hermanos poetas, desde la nave que viaja de la Tierra y sus lombrices al seno de una galaxia que también llora en quechua, discute en portugués y ríe en chileno. Donde quiera que estés, te enseñaré cómo nombrar los pájaros, los satélites y las historias de nuestro pasado y porvenir. Solo hace falta seguir buscando. Gracias. Hopefully, some folks who know Spanish were listening or will listen to this recording. But yeah, I think it kind of captures my sense of the challenges of the past and trying to make a place for these different cultures elsewhere and without, necessarily thinking of everything as just an amalgamation or just will become one kind of pan Latin American thing, but unique and in its own way with the different cultures and languages spoken throughout the Americas. I'm now going to read a bit of a longer piece that I haven't really read elsewhere since it is a bit lengthier, a bit kind of quirky. There is some mention of body modification, but I don't think it's anything too much into the horror genre, at least from my perspective. Maybe writing it, it felt a little bit creepy. But this is To Be Reborn on Europa, and it's from Self Star magazine. And I really appreciated the comments from the editor on working on this piece, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. And it's from issue 2 in January of 2023. To Be Reborn on Europa. Hope kept them open-hearted, pumping oxygen from guild generation to finned generation, smoothly sinking their coveted knowledge into troves buried deep in Europa's ice. It all started when gravity alone could not sustain their ambulatory needs, and their circulatory system around Proxima Centauri could only last 600 orbits, or 20 Earth years. They were weary of their own flesh. Such were these bipedal mammals who were finally thrust into the bodies of sirens, subjected to the trials and tribulations of medical interventions. All too familiar with testing, tubing, and stunted growth, this was a chance at aquatic movement. A new tale for posterity to tell when the risks of human biology proved too great. Thin skin to protected scales, short bones to extended cartilage, quiet lungs to capacious gills, horizontal footsteps to lateral strokes. Disinfected rooms housed experiments led by scientists stitching sinewy people into new possibilities when their lungs failed, breathing life into neo-mermaids. Misunderstood by the majority, unwilling to see the possibility of a mermaid metamorphosis, they huddled together, basking in their own potential, destined to find home and hearth where Homo sapiens never could. Not content to live in the shadows, they welcomed their cure and tale. It was their chance at breathing fully among the stars that shined a billion future homes. In interstellar space, the calm hum of artificial gravity patches serenity into the unending night. The once experiments glide across aqueous habitats. With radiation warped gills, they too breathe among the stars. They command vessels packed with tools and goods, finally able to escape the captivity of their human forms. Once told they would never leave Proxima Centauri, neo-mermaids channel their gifts into a voyage to Sol. They use their once bipedal skills of navigation, kelp photosynthesis, and other onboard alchemy to float through gravity itself on their homeward voyage, bubbles popping as waves push rockets across 4 light years. They seek a birthright for their kind on Europa, the abandoned moon in Jovian orbit, unwanted for the fright that haunts its icy depths, a plunge only neo-mermaids are willing to take. No welcome ceremony marks their arrival, nor any radio signals to disturb other living beings. Bioluminescent rhythms surrender a once closed portal, opening a hatch into a near endless sea cascading in light. Impressive geometries greet neo-mermaids into her sharp depths. Siren dwellings coil around her icebergs, reclaiming a culture of sensory art and science as full triumphs of physics. Europa's new sentient species gets to work, building communal spaces for motley company, creating relays to communicate like the Incas of Terra, and developing launch pads to one day seek worlds beyond. Years grow longer as metabolism slows, securing neo-mermaids home and homes for generations which with statuesque commemorations of past hunts and haunts, a place to live authentically until centuries change human morality. So that one was To Be Reborn on Europa, and a bit of a kind of quest to understand what could have located one day or in the past or in the future to Europa's icy waters. There's got to be something in there. I don't think it's anything as terrifying as what we make it out to be, but there definitely could be something. You never know. After that one, I think it's good to read a bit of a funnier poem. And this one, the idea just came to me. I guess I have a thing against toaster ovens and toasters. They can be a bit finicky and can cause some electrical issues, but they are great for toasting bread. So I channeled my conflicting emotions into writing this poem, which appeared in Grand Falloon. I'm not sure if it's still active, but this is your new onboard toaster oven. So I'll be reading you the instructions for your new onboard toaster oven. Thus begins your guide to your new onboard toaster oven, the intergalactic chef's supreme machine. It has 4 settings: cold, toasty, scalding, and bonfire. I'm afraid that bonfire translates to volcano in some Centaurian dialects. Bonfire, a veritable feast, may be used when an interspecies party is held on board. Simply insert 2 pre-cut loaves of bread into the toaster oven, and it will, of course, gleefully produce perfectly toasted bread, all according to the proper xenobiological dietary restrictions. This device comes equipped with melodious music while you overcook delicacies, microgravity protected multigrain enhancers, laser-activated panini press capabilities, and naturally, freshly made French toast. Spontaneous combustion has, regrettably, occurred while in eccentric orbits with Mercury in retrograde. We highly encourage you not to power on your device until leaving the solar system, but please purchase your Cuban bread, Martian loaves with marmalade, and Oort Cloud airy ciabatta rolls prior to departure. We truly hope you will enjoy your toaster oven, patent pending, and will follow the complicated diagrams of bobs and bits needed for assembly. Minor assembly required. Do not attempt in an asteroid field. Attached, we include Terran, Centaurian, and many more exotic recipes, all for your perusal. We know you'll simply eat bagels and toast. Please enjoy. The robots who made the intergalactic chef's supreme machine will be ever so happy. That one, that's just a lot of fun. I would love to kind of reconcile my feelings for toaster ovens for their practicality and conveniently made bread and paninis and all that good stuff. I think we've got a few more minutes to read a few more pieces, so I'm going to go with another narrative piece, which also has some female characters in a similar scene to my earlier one about life on a station. This is T&R Used Books and Curios, and you can find it in Utopia Science Fiction magazine from the June-July 2023 issue. T&R Used Books and Curios. Tawdry electronic shops and video bars spook neon nightlights across the supply depot. Passerby come for a quick dose of dopamine. Some stay for the serotonin of late-night eats and the promise of fascinating liaisons with sentient bipeds. T&R Used Books and Curios takes care of a different sort of ache. The kind that happens when you tire of the fast life, sprinting between cargo runs, and the adrenaline of hitting atmosphere as you promise your best friend light years away that you'll get your precious two souls together in this millennium. Established 15 solar years ago, Tula and Reina never thought much about being tied down to a relationship or collecting all the detritus settlers leave astray on starships that get turned for a profit by some old friendly gays in a supply depot whose name nobody ever remembers. You never think it will happen to you until your myopia gets worse, the joint pain settles in, and you're out of luck trying to get the most lucrative of pilot jobs, and the person you'd been running towards suddenly gets a whole lot closer. So you evidently get married and say it's for the financial benefits. T&R Used Books and Curios is a whisper of warm cats prancing around bookshelves, of what it would be like to fall in love deeper than you can imagine when your partner dumps an entire solar array setup on your Terran rugs, and the whole quixotic project leaves you belly laughing on the floor. The store promises happy memories, a few useless trinkets, and spellbinding adventures read between sips of chamomile tea made fresh from the hydroponic farm. Each visit is unique, for Tula and Reina handpick their selection, sending the rest to public collection and the finest wares to their own living unit, much to Reina's chagrin. Come visit us when you're full and well rested, but otherwise depleted of human companionship. Reward yourself with being well looked after by a lady in envy who will ask you about your day, your mechanical problems, and kindly ask you to sign the guest book on your way out. That is T&R's Used Books and Curios. Let's see what would be next. I do have a Don Quixote piece since I mentioned the adjective quixotic, so I'll go next to Centaurian Quixote from State of Matter, issue 11, and also in the Worldcon souvenir book from last year, which is pretty cool. I'm a Spanish professor, as Akua mentioned, so of course Don Quixote in space had to be written about one day or another. Centaurian Quixote. Tipping at satellites, he speaks confused Spanish at station bars orbiting Alpha Centauri. His noble android Sancho Panza spits binary code at the rockets he still calls burrows. Armed with old star charts, Don Quixote insists on venturing past the ecliptic. Above, he says, are stars beyond our grasp, and rewards better than Castilian gold. There he aims his ship towards Dulcinea, beautifully gleaming in the heavens. He charts his course 50 light years wide, spurred on by a voracious appetite of dehydrated hams and bartered manchego cheese. Dulcinea twinkles at the Quixote's rusted spacesuit before he's thrown off the galactic arm, surviving in a travelogue picked up near Barnard's Star. I'm sure that Don Quixote would get into so many shenanigans if he were in space. Let's see. I do have one longer-ish one and then a short one to end the reading tonight. And I haven't read this one aloud before because it's a little quirky. There's going to be some dates listed that I'll just kind of read them out as numbers, and you should get a sense of what they're referring to. But the dates will get bigger and bigger past our own human lifetimes, which is why it'll sound a little bit strange going on because some people can live in multiple centuries, as we will see. This is Jumping Through Space-Time, and it's from Radon Journal, their first issue. And I also really appreciated working with the editors to fine-tune this one. Jumping through space-time. For all of human history, our lives have coalesced into two numbers and an end dash. We have not transcended our mortality, not yet transhuman, not yet mendable, not yet cryogenically frozen. There will always be a birth and a death, points on cosmic life cycles held steady through the eons. From a life marred by smallpox, 1709 to 1745, to a tranquil existence lasting through decades of technological breakthroughs, 1898 to 1984. We will eventually jump back and forth between the blackness, calling forth more numbers, 2030 to 2050, slash 2100 to 2176. As of a children's game, we become giddy, 2115 to 2130, slash 2236 to 2289, slash 2325 to 2402, jumping higher, 2704 to 2993, slash 15,547 Holocene to 26,752 Anthropocene, through galactic orbits, 2.25 million years to 4.72 million years, slash 6 million years to 9.2 million years, and the Andromeda Milky Way collision, 17.5 billion years to 17.9 billion years, launching us skyward as our bodies and planets grow and age. We will witness wonders unmatched by a single lifetime, chasing Halley's Comet across the sky. Our ships will fly past the orbit of Pluto, and we watch great-great-grandchildren grow up light years away to eliminate age-old prejudices. They will go on the journey of lifetimes, costing nothing but the wisdom we impart, a service to humanity like none other, sleeping through years of turmoil to come out on the other side more aware of our collective humanity than before. So that was Jumping Through Space-Time. And the last one that I'm going to read is also from the Strong Women, Strange World Small Bites book. And I thought it would be a nice little one to end, especially since in many parts of the world it's evening, at least in the eastern US and maybe for many others. So I'm sure the listeners of the recording could be in any place at any time. And I'd like to say a special hello to those listening in from last week. Thank you, time travelers, for being here. So this last poem is Mycelium Nightlight. Enchanted mushrooms light the room. The young charges are tucked nicely away, as if in the cocoons they will seek when they reach metamorphosis. A shallow sigh ghosts along the walls, and even the littlest littles know it is almost too late, nearly out of time. Tomorrow will be here soon, and the night grows warm in the forest. Thank you so much for listening in, and I'd be more than happy to share a little more about my work or anything else you might want to hear about.
Bravo, bravo. Oh my I could listen to you forever, for always.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so wonderful and delightful. And I inhabit all these different places. I'm just there's so many I want to return to again and again. I think particularly about your explorations of neo humanity with
Mhm.
neo mermaids, which you conjure and evoke with those. I want to know more about those places. Have you thought about doing series of poems for any of these places that you go to? In the way that you mentioned that T and R
Hmm.
might be the return to the couple we heard about earlier, or
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
do you?
Yeah, I do have some ideas that are kind of in the similar vein to a belief in cosmic dailiness, where they're like slice of life visions of what things might be elsewhere with a little bit of that like Latinx US culture built
Mhm.
in. It was really neat kind of cultivating the poems for this reading because I hadn't returned to them in a little while, and
Hmm.
especially since I've been working on other projects, haven't really thought as much about these worlds, but I think there absolutely will be. And I don't want to say too much about my particular idea, but I do have an idea that will hopefully be a future collection that has kind of series and more kind of connected poems than I've done in the past, because I think absolutely there's a lot of world building that can be done there. And the Neo Mermaids in particular, that poem was really a one-off. But I think there's also a lot there. And I have written
So rich. It is
written
so.
about Europa in other contexts, or traveling towards some place and encountering other people, right? Like some of these things that you might find as like common fiction tropes, I also like to write about
Mhm.
through poetry, and especially the idea of like people being in a kind of settlement, like a
Mhm.
station orbiting some place where people are coming and going. Absolutely, there's a lot more to think about there.
Exactly. Our There is so much that to be uncovered in domesticity, but
Mm,
domesticity in the speculative, you open our vision of that. Like we when we when we are called to imagine in our culture, it's always writ large. And it
hmm
tends to be, at least, I mean, you may not agree, but it tends to be mechanistic and what you will build out there.
hmm
What I enjoy so much about your poetry is what we experience and hear when we go out there.
hmm
What out there I've got, if anyone has questions, please mention them, but I have lots and lots of questions. So, when did you start writing poetry?
That's a great question. I think, I mean, sure, a little bit here and there as a kid in like primary school, but probably mostly with the intent of producing a form known as poetry was around early teens, start of high school is when I started.
Oh,
Like I joined
great.
a creative writing club in high school. But we did a lot of like flash fiction prompts,
Hmm.
which were fun. And then I kind of throughout high school got more into writing poetry, but none of it really stuck. Like I wrote about things that mattered to me and things of the world around me, but I really didn't find speculative poetry until around 2020.
That was the next question. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had been reading science fiction and speculative work that whole time, but I didn't realize like, oh, wait, you can bring these into poetry too, right? Just hadn't been something I'd heard about, even though, hello, I was reading Edgar Allan Poe.
Mhm.
I love Goblin Market. Like I was encountering
Yes.
speculative poetry in like my English classes, and I majored in English in college. And when I was in college,
Hmm.
I did do a bit of writing, especially freshman, sophomore year, but again, it just wasn't really feeling like I was meshing with the way that kind of the currents of poetry were going
Hmm.
at that time, and finding a topic and finding a form was still something I was thinking about. And once I found speculative poetry magazines, I realized that was exactly where I wanted to be. I've done a little
Mm.
bit of flash fiction, but I really like developing narrative through poetry and kind of those little glimpses into what could be. So yeah,
You
so
definitely give us those, and
mm,
I'm here for it. I love them. Thank you. I want to ask about uh, Spanish in your
mm,
writing of poetry. And when you read us, in fact, it was so exciting for me because I don't know Spanish, but to recognize the words, having heard you said the word. So
hmm
when you arrived at certain beats and places in the
hmm
poem, I was like,
hmm
yes, los palabras. I know how. I mean, I don't know. What was the other one that I loved? En las zonas remotas, and I was like,
hmm
oh my gosh! And when you said, I love this line in your poem. I sing for my poet siblings, and
Mm,
I was waiting to see if I could catch that in the Spanish version, in the Spanish poem,
mm-hmm.
not even the version, the Spanish poem.
Right.
Was that Hermanos Poetas? Or was
Oh,
that
I was
something?
looking for a second.
Oh,
Hermanos,
okay.
let me see how I wrote it.
Because I love that line. I dreamed in sonnets. I mean, Angela, you're just so exquisite. I dreamed in sonnets and a cosmic caesura. And then you went on to say, I sing for my poet siblings. And so I was trying to see if I
Oh,
could
okay,
find.
yeah. Here it is.
Okay.
Hermanes poetas, and I
Yes.
use like the gender neutral, so to speak, version of
Ah.
the word for siblings.
So if that was it, that was it. Was I right?
Yeah. See, there's a lot of a lot of familiarity between English and Spanish, like Neptune, Saturno, satélite, um, cometas, like all of that. Those
It
words are pretty
sounded
similar.
beautiful in both. In English, because I speak English and could understand,
hmm
you had those great lines, but hearing it in Spanish. So the question is,
hmm
what makes you decide that the poem should exist in both languages?
Hmm. I think just the nature of the poetry markets nowadays, you kind of have to have some sort of translation or some sort of apparatus for readers to be able to understand the poem. So I usually get away with using a few lines in Spanish, as I've done for other pieces, including one of the other ones I read tonight. But if I'm writing in Spanish, I'll often translate it just again out of necessity. But I wanted to write
Mhm.
this piece in Spanish because it has a lot to do with language, right?
Mhm,
Of
mhm,
the
mhm.
coloniality of language,
Yes.
of thinking about what, whose words are valid. And the words I chose, like water and swamp, had a lot to do with like the environment around which
Mhm.
I grew up in Florida. And
Oh,
the kinds of grass that you find there are not the same as what you'll find in like the northeastern United States. And the Spanish moss is hanging off of trees, like in a lot of places, like even here in South Carolina. Um, but that's not kind of the like standard default nature when you think of like the North America, right? It's kind of its own thing, and then like linked to the Caribbean and the rest of Latin America. Um, so I felt like there was kind of a reason to say these things in Spanish.
yes.
So yeah, and I know it was kind of hard to come off in reading, but there's this like caesura in the middle, and there's kind of these stacked stanzas that are kind of or verses that are communicating with one another, thinking about like the
Mm.
multitudes that are out there and who's speaking what, and a lot of science fiction has this idea of that like everyone's speaking the same language, this like dialect of English, in the future, and just kind of making things monolingual and monolithic in a way that just isn't showing what it's actually like in a very multilingual, multicultural world.
I love the resistance. I'm here for it. I applaud it. Persist, please, because even in the overt idea of using the same language. We're not using the same
Mm,
language. One of the most powerful um, episodes for me in the Star Trek series was when I think it was Jarmok and Jalad. This the translator could translate
mm,
what the alien was saying, and it still made no sense
hmm
because the people spoke in metaphor, and the metaphor
mm,
came from the culture. So even having the word, that was the word, you had to understand culturally what was being said, what was
hmm
being presented. So again, I want to spend another moment with this. What makes you decide when the poems you write are going to be in English or Spanish?
I think I mostly have been writing in English, but like I said, if I have
Mm,
that kind of cultural component of like, let me think about what these people would be experiencing in this other place and time or spaceship or whatever. Like thinking about
mm.
like a quinceañera in space
I
or,
read, you had that, that's
from
one of my favorite of your
the
poems.
collection and in the Spanish
You
version,
didn't read that tonight. Oh.
no, in the collection I added a like like a Easter egg for Spanish readers because the first part starts with the start of the Las Mañanitas, like Mexican birthday song that I've kind of
Mm,
remastered into a kind of space version of Las Mañanitas. Um, and the Spanish poems in that collection are largely translated into Spanish from the English
mm,
from me. So I think the answer is simply just the poetry market is predominantly English language and
mm,
readers are predominantly English speakers. So I am very deliberate about when
mm,
I choose to write in Spanish, but
mhm.
because of the ways that you can get the work out, it's mostly in English.
Okay. Um, Next question. So you did say at the beginning that your speculative poetry was going to be of the science fiction type.
Mm.
Uh, have you tried any of the other subgenres, genres, approaches?
Absolutely. And I mean, I say science fiction is kind of a catch-all term that it's, not always going to be about spaceships and stuff, but I'm also not the kind of person who does high fantasy. I haven't really
Hmm.
written much about dragons, right? Everyone kind of has their own ways into the genre.
Loved, I love dragons, sorry.
No, I do too. I just haven't been writing about them and there's some wonderful people, poets writing, fairy tale retellings and all these sorts of
Mm,
things. So
mhm,
I think for me, I've mostly thought about space and the place around Earth in
mm,
the future and the technology and the science behind it. My family growing up, science was just everywhere. I was growing up in
mm,
Florida as the space shuttles were still taking off. So all of that kind of is part of that like imaginary behind which I write poetry. But I have written some that are kind of more speculative in kind of that wider sense of the term, where there isn't like that one thing that triggers like, oh, there's an alien, oh, there's, cloning going on. Obviously, this is a speculative poem. I've done some that are more like homages to science.
mm.
Um, but yeah, I think I'm mostly around the space of science fiction. I want to do a little bit more with things like fantasy and just kind of stretching the way I think about the genre, and especially as somebody who teaches about science fiction, it's really capacious and not just little boxes that you check off.
Will you tell us a little bit about your routine?
Mm.
What's your
Um,
writing routine like?
Yeah, I mean, I write poetry when I can. I'm in academia, so my writing is mostly emails and
Mm,
publications and other sorts of prose. So usually before I even sit down to write, I'll come up with kind of an idea or an image or just something that kind of sparks a poem. And I have a couple of things like jotted down now that some are more clear than others in terms of how I want that to develop. And then once I have a little bit of time, usually in the evenings, I'll start to make it coalesce into a poem, or if it's kind of finicky, maybe I turn that into a flash fiction piece or something like that. But I don't have a particular routine necessarily that I follow since I really just kind of let the poem come to mind and see kind of how I want to take it. And then if it's going to be a prose poem versus a poem in verse or how short or long, I've been really trying to experiment with length since I've kind of
Mm.
got this like standard like 30 something line page length poem and with like six stanzas that I've tended to just kind of crank out over the years. And so I've been trying to be more deliberate about the form and the just the way that the words are presented. I was recently writing one where I was like, it just doesn't look right. And then I made it a prose poem and it just fit and meshed together a lot better.
That's amazing to redo your lines into
Mm.
a prose format. Or the struggle with the line for me is an ongoing struggle. You work as an editor and you're a professor. At what point in your process, in your poem creating, do you edit your poem?
It can be as soon as like right after drafting something, or I
Mm,
might put it away for a while. It just depends, especially if I'm thinking about how it would fit within like a wider collection.
mm,
Because I wrote the two speculative collections and I've kind of taken a break from forming like a manuscript length work and have kind of been
mhm.
going in a lot of different directions with the poems that I write. And so now I might want to bring some of
That
them
more
together
fun?
more.
Is that
Yeah.
more fun for you or less fun or freeing or
It just depends. I think it's also a matter of just like time you have, like I said,
mm,
the last couple years I've just been trying different things because I had a really clear vision of where I was going in the writing around the first two collections that
mm,
now I'm like, no, I actually have like all these different areas that I want to check out and get a feel for as a writer instead of feeling like I'm like, okay, I have this project now.
mhm.
So yeah. And I could also talk a little bit about the Eye to the Telescope
Yes, please.
issue that
This is a good
I'm
time to
editing.
do so. Yes.
Yeah, so I am guest editing the next issue of Eye to the Telescope, issue 60, which will come out this May, and we're still open for submissions as of the time of this recording up until April 15th, end of the day, wherever that is in the world for you, of this year, 2026. And the theme is paying tribute, and you can read on the Eye to the Telescope website the guidelines and all that good stuff, but basically it's a pretty open theme of how you interpret paying tribute. It can be a very direct tribute to your favorite Star Trek episode, Star Wars, or kind of fan-related tribute, or even a tribute to a scientist or a writer. But it could be something that's a little bit, beyond that and not just saying to somebody at the start of the poem. It can be thinking about something in the past in a certain way. I mentioned cryptid somewhere in the call for poems. It can be thinking about any sort of thing, a person, a place, a non-living, living thing, as at atomic, microscopic as you want it to be, or as absolutely massive. And there's no sort of, you know, guidelines, so to speak, of how your poem is supposed to look, because I think for many years tributes have kind of been seen as this like very solemn thing with its routines and structure, right? And those still exist, but there's a lot more behind that. And tributes are something that I explored my own academic work. So I was really excited
Mm.
to pose this theme for the speculative poetry community, and I'm really enjoying the pieces that have been coming in so far. And you, like I said, you still got a bit of time to think about the theme and how you might want to respond to paying tribute for Eye to the Telescope.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's 8 p.m., so now it's time to say goodbye to all the company. I am so grateful for your words, for your creativity, for the worlds in which you've opened our minds and hearts to. So thank you for reading. Thank you to all of you who have attended the Starburst series for Women's History Month. Please continue to listen and read speculative poetry. Seek us out, join with us. I wish everybody peace, health, and safety. deep breathe, be clear, use discernment in these difficult times. And I'm grateful for your ever listening and open hearts. And I will say with this, peace and good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.